The twin suns of Arendor were setting, casting a molten glow over the silver spires of Ilia's town. The sky, which had been a calm lavender for most of the day, now blazed in hues of deep crimson and violet. From her window, Ilia watched as the bioluminescent trees began to light up, their soft glow illuminating the winding streets below. It was a sight she had seen countless times, yet tonight her mind was elsewhere, drifting to distant stars and far-off worlds. Ilia was unlike most of the others in her town. While her peers found solace in the natural beauty of their planet and the peaceful rhythm of their lives, Ilia's heart and mind craved the unknown. Since she was a child, she had been captivated by the universe beyond Arendor. The thought that there were beings, intelligent life forms living on other planets, thrilled her. And of all the species in the universe, none fascinated her more than humans. It had all started 5 years ago. Ilia had come across an old collection of Earth magazines in a second-hand shop tucked away in the market. Among the items for sale was a bundle of worn paper, bound together, with strange images and even stranger writing. At first she didn't know what it was, but as she flipped through the pages, the vivid illustrations caught her attention. They were diagrams, detailed depictions of the human body. The pages contained information about human anatomy, their biological processes, and most curiously, their reproductive system. It was unlike anything she had seen before. The alien biology of humans intrigued her in a way she couldn't quite explain. The more she read, the more fascinated she became, not just with the mechanics of their reproduction, but with the implications of it. The idea that humans, despite their fragile appearance, created life in such a delicate, intimate manner was a concept that felt both familiar and foreign to her. Her own people reproduced in a completely different way, more efficient, more clinical, lacking the warmth and physical closeness that seemed to define human connection. For years, Ilia had wondered what it might feel like to experience life as a human, to understand the emotions and desires that seemed to accompany their complex relationships. She often imagined what it would be like to meet one in person, to ask them about their culture, their lives, and if she were brave enough, what they felt when they were with someone they loved. She had kept these thoughts private, even from her closest friends. The Arendorians were an advanced race, logical and serene in nature. While her people encouraged curiosity about the universe, there was an unspoken expectation that certain topics, like the human fascination with reproduction, remained in the realm of academic study, not personal interest. Ilia, however, couldn't help but wonder about the emotional depth behind it all. And then, one day, everything changed. Ilia's town, nestled in the heart of a bioluminescent forest, rarely saw visitors from other worlds. Trade ships would occasionally pass through, but they were mostly automated or piloted by beings from nearby planets. The arrival of a human spaceship, then, was something of a spectacle. Word spread quickly an Earth merchant had landed on the outskirts of the town, seeking to trade supplies and goods from across the galaxy. When Ilia first heard the news, her heart leaped in her chest. A human here, in her town. She had to see for herself. That evening she made her way to the market, her steps quick and her mind racing. The marketplace was alive with the usual hum of activity. Traders haggled over goods, and locals exchanged stories as the soft glow of the trees bathed everything in a comforting light. But her eyes were drawn to the far end of the market, where a group had gathered around a small stall. There, standing behind a counter lined with exotic items from various planets, was the human. He was taller than she had expected, with broad shoulders and a presence that seemed to command attention. His skin, slightly tanned from what she assumed were many years under distant suns, stood in contrast to the delicate shimmer of the Arendorians around him. His dark hair was cropped short, but what struck her most was the easy smile that played on his lips as he spoke with the locals. His eyes, a deep shade of brown, gleamed with an intensity that Ilia found both intriguing and disarming. She stood at a distance at first, watching, observing. There was something about the way he moved, the way he interacted with the people around him, that was so different, so human. His laugh was deep, a sound that reverberated through the air, and every now and then he would gesture with his hands, explaining something about the wares he was selling. He wasn't just a merchant, he was a traveler, a man who had seen the universe and seemed at home in it. Ilia, a voice called from behind her, pulling her out of her trance. It was her friend Lyra, waving her over to one of the nearby stalls. Ilya nodded absently, but couldn't pull her gaze away from the human. His presence filled the space around him, radiating a strange warmth she hadn't expected. Something inside her stirred a sensation she didn't recognize, something both thrilling and unnerving. That night, as she lay in bed, the image of the human's face lingered in her mind. She tried to focus on the practical questions: what brought him here? What goods did he trade? How long would he stay? But no matter how hard she tried, her thoughts kept drifting back to him. The way he smiled, the way his voice had carried through the marketplace, the way his body seemed so different from the Arendorian she had grown up around. The curiosity she had felt when reading those Earth magazines was nothing compared to what she felt now. This was no longer an abstract question about biology or cultural differences. It was something far more personal. For the next few days, Ilya found herself visiting the market more frequently than usual. Each time she found an excuse to pass by the human's stall. At first, she told herself it was just to observe, to satisfy her curiosity about his world. But the more she saw him, the more she wanted to speak to him. She would linger nearby, pretending to examine the goods on sale, listening to the way he spoke with the locals. On the fourth day, she finally gathered the courage to approach his stall. "Hello," she said, her voice wavering slightly as she stepped forward. He turned to her, his deep brown eyes locking onto hers. For a moment she felt as though time had stopped. The noise of the marketplace faded into the background, and all she could focus on was the warmth in his gaze. "Hello," he replied, his voice as rich and smooth as she had imagined. "What can I do for you?" Ilya swallowed, trying to steady her racing heart. She glanced down at the array of goods on his stall: jewelry from distant planets, strange fruits she didn't recognize, and a few technological devices she assumed were used for communication or navigation. Her mind scrambled for something to say. I've never seen these before," she said, picking up a small, glowing orb. It felt warm in her hand, and the light inside shifted as she held it. He smiled. That's a star flare. They're from a small moon in the Ethelon system. Beautiful, aren't they? They absorb the light of nearby stars and release it slowly over time." Ilya nodded, her eyes widening in wonder. "Incredible," she murmured, her fingers tracing the delicate surface of the orb. "You've traveled a lot, haven't you?" He chuckled softly. "You could say that. I've been to more planets than I can count. Each one has something unique, something worth seeing. But I have to say," he added, his gaze drifting to the sky above, "Arendor is one of the most beautiful places I've ever been." Ilya's heart skipped a beat at his words. She wasn't sure if he meant the planet or something more. "I'm Michael, by the way," he said, extending a hand toward her. "Ilya," she replied, placing her hand in his. The moment their skin touched, a jolt of something electric, warm and thrilling rushed through her. She quickly pulled her hand away, her cheeks flushing with a color that matched the deepening hues of the sunset. From that moment, Ilya knew that this human Michael was going to change her life in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. What had started as a distant curiosity had now become something far more immediate, far more personal. As she walked away from the stall that evening, the glowing star flare still in her hand, her thoughts raced. Her fascination with humans had always been about understanding their biology, their culture. But now, with Michael in her life, it wasn't just about knowledge. It was about him. And as the twin suns of Arendor dipped below the horizon, Ilya couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something far greater than she had ever imagined. The next few days felt like a dream to Ilya, the edges of her world blurring and shifting in a way that was unfamiliar, yet intoxicating. The gentle routines of her life, the quiet mornings spent wandering the glowing forests, the tranquil afternoons in her home filled with the soft hum of Arendor's bioluminescent life, now seemed dull in comparison to the moments she spent thinking about Michael. It wasn't just his presence that lingered in her thoughts, but his words, his voice, the easy confidence with which he carried himself. Each time she thought of him, her mind would drift back to their brief conversation, the warmth in his eyes when he'd said her name. There was something about the way he saw the world that drew her in, something more than mere physical attraction. It was as if he had unlocked a door inside her, one that had been hidden for years, waiting for someone to find the key. Ilya had always been curious about the universe, about the mysteries of life and the vast expanse of space. But this was different. This was no longer the abstract curiosity of a girl with her head in the stars. This was something far more intimate, far more urgent. On the 5th day after their first meeting, she found herself once again standing at the edge of the marketplace, her eyes scanning the bustling crowd for any sign of him. The marketplace was alive with energy, the air filled with the scent of exotic spices and the soft hum of trading ships hovering above. Merchants from distant planets haggled with the locals, their voices rising and falling in a cacophony of different languages. But for Ilya, the only sound that mattered was the steady, rhythmic beat of her heart, growing louder with each passing moment. And then she saw him. Michael stood behind his stall, his back to her as he arranged a set of shimmering crystals on display. He wore the same casual confidence as before, his movements purposeful yet unhurried. His dark hair caught the light of the marketplace's many lanterns, giving him an almost ethereal glow. Ilya felt her breath catch in her throat as she watched him, her mind racing with thoughts of what she might say, how she might bridge the growing distance between her curiosity and the unfamiliar emotions that had begun to take root inside her. Without thinking, she moved toward him. "Michael," she called softly, her voice barely audible above the din of the market. He turned at the sound of her voice, his expression brightening as soon as he saw her. For a moment, the noise of the marketplace seemed to fade into the background, leaving just the two of them standing there in the midst of the bustling crowd. "Ilya," he said, his smile warm and inviting. "I was hoping you'd stop by again." Her heart fluttered at his words, a wave of nervous excitement washing over her. She approached the stall, her fingers brushing against the edge of the counter, as if to ground herself in the moment. Up close, the intensity of his gaze was even more striking, his dark eyes filled with a quiet intelligence and warmth that seemed to see through her, as if he could sense the curiosity and wonder bubbling just beneath the surface. I couldn't stay away," she admitted with a shy smile. "Your stories about the other planets, the things you've seen, they stay with me, even after I've left." Michael chuckled, the sound low and rich. "Well, I'm glad I can leave an impression," he said, leaning casually against the counter. "But I think it's more than just the stories, isn't it?" Ilya felt her cheeks flush at the suggestion, her heart skipping a beat. She glanced down at the array of items on his stall, trying to gather her thoughts. It was true there was more to it. The fascination she felt was no longer just about the strange, far-off places he described or the odd trinkets he sold. It was about him, about the connection that seemed to spark between them every time they spoke. But how could she put that into words without sounding foolish? "I think," she began slowly, "there's something about the way you see the world that draws me in. You've traveled so far, seen so many things, but you still seem grounded, like you belong everywhere you go, but also nowhere at the same time." Michael's smile softened, and for a moment, a flicker of something deeper passed through his eyes, something that mirrored her own feelings of displacement. "That's an interesting way to put it," he said, his voice thoughtful. "I guess I've always felt like I'm just passing through, like I'm a part of every place I visit, but never really belonging. It's the nature of the job, I suppose." Ilya tilted her head, intrigued. "Do you ever get lonely?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. He hesitated for a moment, his gaze drifting away from her to the horizon beyond the marketplace, where the twin suns of Arendor hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the town. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, more introspective. "Sometimes," he admitted, "I meet so many people, see so many faces, but at the end of the day, I'm always moving on. It's hard to form lasting connections when you're constantly on the move." Ilya nodded, understanding all too well the feeling of isolation, even amidst a world teeming with life. Arendor was a planet of beauty and tranquility, but for someone like her, whose heart yearned for the stars, it could feel confining. Her curiosity had always set her apart, making her feel like an outsider in her own world. "I felt that too," she confessed. "Even here, surrounded by my own people, I sometimes feel like I don't quite belong. My curiosity about other worlds, it makes me different. I think that's why I'm so fascinated by humans, by your world." You live with such intensity. There's a depth to your experiences that I can't quite understand, but I want to." Michael's gaze returned to her, and this time there was something new in his eyes, something that mirrored the curiosity and wonder she felt inside. "Is that what you want to understand, Elia?" he asked softly. "Human experiences?" She hesitated, the weight of his question hanging between them. For years, she had wondered about humans, about their bodies, their minds, their relationships. But now, with Michael standing before her, it wasn't just a distant academic curiosity. It was personal. It was about him. "Yes," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want to understand everything." The silence that followed was thick with unspoken thoughts, with the kind of tension that only existed when two people stood on the precipice of something deeper. Elia's heart raced in her chest, her thoughts a tangled web of curiosity, fear, and something far more primal, a desire to know, to feel, to connect. But before either of them could say more, the sound of a bell rang out across the marketplace, signaling the end of the trading day. The noise brought them both back to the present, the weight of the moment dissipating like smoke in the air. Michael straightened, a rueful smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Looks like that's my cue to start packing up." Elia blinked, feeling as if the world had shifted beneath her feet. She didn't want their conversation to end, didn't want to leave this newfound connection hanging in the air. But she also knew she couldn't linger forever. "Will you be here tomorrow?" she asked, her voice betraying her eagerness. He nodded. "I'll be here for a while. Plenty of supplies left to trade." Relief washed over her, and she smiled. "Then I'll see you tomorrow." As she turned to leave, her heart still racing from the intensity of their conversation, Michael's voice stopped her in her tracks. "Elia," he called out. She turned back to face him, her breath catching in her throat as she met his gaze. There was something different in his eyes now, something more than just casual interest. "I've been to a lot of places," he said, his voice low and sincere. "But I think Arendor might be my favorite so far." Her heart swelled at his words, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop spinning. She didn't know what to say, so she simply smiled, her chest tight with the weight of emotions she was only just beginning to understand. As she walked away, the soft glow of the star flare he had given her the first day still nestled in her hand. Elia knew one thing for certain: her life was no longer the same. Whatever this was between them, this strange, magnetic pull, was more than just curiosity. It was the beginning of something new, something that scared and excited her in equal measure. And as the twin suns dipped below the horizon, casting their final rays of light over the market, Elia felt a deep sense of anticipation for what tomorrow might bring. The days that followed felt like a waking dream to Elia. Each morning, she would rise with a sense of eager anticipation, her thoughts drifting instantly to Michael. The marketplace had become more than just a place to buy supplies. It was where she felt truly alive, where the constant hum of her curiosity was soothed by his presence. Their conversations had grown longer and deeper, shifting from small talk about planets and trade to personal stories, shared in the soft glow of Arendor's ever-present bioluminescence. The more she learned about him, the more fascinated she became. He spoke of distant worlds she had only read about, of star systems with strange gravity wells and planets with skies the color of molten gold. Yet it was his humanity that captivated her the most, the warmth in his voice, the kindness in his gaze, and the quiet sadness that lingered behind his smile when he spoke of the solitude of his travels. Elia had never felt so connected to anyone before. Her world, with its serene beauty and unspoken customs, had always felt slightly detached from her innermost desires. The other Arendorians were kind, but their lives lacked the sense of urgency and wonder that seemed to pulse within her. With Michael, everything felt different. There was an electricity in the air when they spoke, a shared understanding that transcended the boundaries of their vastly different worlds. It was this growing connection that led Elia to make a decision she had never thought she'd have the courage to make. She was going to invite Michael to her home. On Arendor, such an invitation was a deeply personal gesture. Homes were considered sacred spaces, places of solitude and reflection. To invite someone into that space was a sign of trust, a way of saying you belong in my life. Elia had never invited anyone beyond her family into her home before. The thought of inviting Michael both thrilled and terrified her, but the idea had taken root, and now it seemed inevitable. The morning of the invitation, Elia found herself standing in front of the mirror, her reflection illuminated by the soft glow of the bioluminescent plants that lined the walls of her home. She smoothed her hands over her shimmering silver dress, a garment that hugged her figure in a way that felt both modest and elegant. Her iridescent skin glowed softly in the light, and her pale blue eyes reflected the nervous energy swirling inside her. She had rehearsed what she would say to him countless times, but now, standing on the precipice of the moment, her mind was a whirl of uncertainty. What if he said no? What if he didn't feel the same connection she did? Elia took a deep breath, pushing those thoughts aside. She couldn't let fear hold her back. Not now. When she arrived at the marketplace that afternoon, the usual bustle of activity surrounded her, but her focus was entirely on Michael. He stood at his stall, as he always did, greeting customers with that same warm smile that never failed to make her heart race. As she approached, he looked up and their eyes met, and for a moment, everything else faded away. "Elia," he greeted, his voice as familiar as a melody she could never tire of hearing. "I was hoping you'd come by." She smiled, feeling the weight of her decision settling in her chest. "Of course. I couldn't stay away." Michael chuckled, leaning against the counter with that easy charm she had come to know so well. "I'm starting to think you're more interested in me than my wares." Ilia's cheeks flushed at his teasing, but there was no malice in his words, just that same gentle humor that made her feel at ease. She had come to love the way he spoke, the way his words seemed to dance around the edges of her thoughts, coaxing her out of her shell. "I suppose you've caught me," she replied, her smile widening. "But I have an excuse this time. I wanted to ask you something." His brow lifted, curiosity sparking in his dark eyes. "Oh, what is it?" Elia hesitated, feeling her heart race in her chest. This was the moment. She took a breath, steadying herself, and then spoke. "I'd like to invite you to my home," she said, the words coming out more confidently than she had expected. "I thought, perhaps we could talk more, away from the marketplace." Michael's expression shifted, surprise flickering in his gaze, but there was no hesitation in his response. "I'd love that." A flood of relief washed over her, and she felt a smile tugging at her lips. "Wonderful. I can show you more of Arendor too, if you're interested. There's so much beyond the marketplace that I think you'd like to see." "I'd love to see it," he said, his voice sincere. "Lead the way." They left the bustling market behind, stepping into the quiet outskirts of the town. The transition from the busy trading hub to the serene, glowing forests of Arendor was stark, but to Elia, it felt like returning to the heart of her world. The bioluminescent trees towered overhead, their leaves casting a soft, ethereal light that bathed the forest floor in a warm, greenish glow. The air was cooler here, the sounds of the market replaced by the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant hum of the forest creatures. As they walked, Michael's curiosity was palpable. He asked questions about the plants, about the way the trees seemed to respond to their presence, glowing brighter as they passed beneath their branches. Elia explained that the forest was alive in ways that were hard to put into words, that the bioluminescent flora of Arendor had a kind of symbiotic relationship with the people, responding to their energy, their emotions. "It's beautiful," Michael said, his voice filled with awe. "It's like the whole planet is alive, in tune with everything around it." "It is," Elia agreed, her gaze drifting to the soft light of the trees. "It's peaceful here. Sometimes I forget how different it must be for someone who's never seen it before." Michael smiled, his eyes soft as he looked at her. "It's different, but in a good way. Your world, it's full of life in a way that most places I've been aren't." They continued their walk in comfortable silence for a while, the glow of the forest guiding them toward Elia's home. It wasn't long before they reached the edge of the trees, where her dwelling came into view. Elia's home was modest, built into the natural landscape of Arendor. The walls were formed from the same bioluminescent materials that made up much of the town, giving the entire structure a soft, inviting glow. Lines of shimmering green and silver twisted along the exterior, their leaves catching the light and casting intricate patterns across the surface. As they approached, Ilya felt a flutter of nervousness in her chest. This was the moment she had been both looking forward to and dreading. Inviting Michael into her home felt like crossing an invisible line, one that she couldn't come back from. But as she glanced at him, seeing the genuine curiosity and warmth in his eyes, she knew she was ready. "This is it," she said softly, gesturing toward the entrance. "It's not much, but it's home." Michael smiled as he stepped forward, his gaze sweeping over the structure with admiration. "It's perfect. It's so different from anything I've seen before." Ilya led him inside, the soft glow of the walls illuminating the cozy interior. Her home was simple, yet elegant, with smooth stone floors and walls lined with plants that cast a gentle light. A small table sat near the center of the room, surrounded by low cushions, and the scent of the forest seemed to linger in the air, filling the space with a calming presence. As they settled at the table, Ilya felt a sense of calm wash over her. Here, in the quiet of her home, the nervous energy that had been building inside her all day seemed to dissipate. She poured them both a glass of Arendorian nectar, the sweet, golden liquid shimmering in the light. "I've never invited anyone into my home before," Ilya admitted as she handed Michael the glass. "It's a personal thing for my people. We don't often share our private spaces with others." Michael took the glass, his fingers brushing hers as he did, sending a spark of warmth through her. "I'm honored," he said softly. "Thank you for inviting me." They sipped their drinks in a comfortable silence for a moment, the glow of the plants casting soft shadows across the room. Ilya could feel the weight of the conversation they were about to have hanging in the air, but she wasn't sure how to begin. She had invited him here for a reason, a question that had been burning inside her for years, and now that they were finally alone, she didn't know how to ask it. Michael, as always, seemed to sense her hesitation. He set his glass down and leaned forward slightly, his gaze steady and kind. "Ilya," he said gently, "I can tell there's something on your mind. You don't have to rush, but I'm here. Whatever it is, I'm listening." Ilya felt her heart swell at his words. He had a way of making her feel safe, of making her feel like she could say anything, and he would understand. She took a deep breath, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her dress as she gathered her thoughts. "I've been curious about humans for a long time," she began, her voice quiet. "Ever since I found those magazines about your world, about your reproductive system. It's something I've never fully understood, something that's fascinated me for years." Michael's brow furrowed slightly, though his expression remained calm. "The reproductive system," he repeated, clearly intrigued by her admission. Ilya nodded, feeling her cheeks warm with embarrassment. "Yes, I know it must sound strange, but your biology is so different from ours, and the way you experience things like love, intimacy, it's all so foreign to me, yet so captivating. I've always wondered what it must be like." For a moment Michael didn't respond, his gaze thoughtful as he considered her words. Ilya held her breath, afraid that she had said too much, that her curiosity had crossed a line. But then he spoke, his voice gentle and understanding. "I don't think it's strange at all," he said, surprising her with his sincerity. "Humans are complicated when it comes to love and intimacy. It's not just biology. There's a lot more to it: emotions, connections. It's about feeling something deeper than just physical attraction." Ilya listened intently, her heart pounding in her chest. This was what she had been searching for, not just the mechanics of reproduction, but the emotional depth behind it. The way humans seemed to form bonds that transcended the physical, the way they spoke of love as something profound and life-altering. "Is that what you want to understand?" Michael asked, his voice soft. "The emotional side of it?" Ilya nodded, her eyes locking onto his. "Yes, I've always been curious about the biology, but now I want to understand more than that. I want to understand what it means to connect with someone the way humans do." Michael's gaze softened, and for a moment the space between them seemed to shrink, as if the entire universe had folded in on itself, leaving just the two of them in the glow of the room. "Ilya," he said quietly, "I think you already understand more than you realize." She blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" He smiled, his eyes warm and filled with something she couldn't quite place. "The connection you're talking about, it's not something that can be explained in words. It's something you feel, and I think in your own way, you've already started to feel it." Elia's heart skipped a beat at his words. Was that true? Had she been feeling something all along, without even realizing it? As they sat there, the silence between them filled with unspoken thoughts. Ilia felt something shift inside her. This was no longer just about curiosity or academic fascination. This was about something far deeper, a connection that had been building between them from the moment they met. And for the first time, Ilia realized that she didn't need to understand it fully. She just needed to let it happen. As the night deepened and the soft glow of the plants cast a warm light over them, Ilia and Michael sat together, their bond growing stronger with each passing moment. And though neither of them knew what the future held, in that moment, they both understood one thing: they were no longer just two beings from different worlds. They were something more, something that transcended the stars. Ilia couldn't shake the feeling that her world had tilted slightly on its axis, as if everything had shifted, and now there was no going back. The night she and Michael had shared in her home had awakened something within her, something more profound than her lifelong curiosity about humans. It was as if the walls she had kept around her emotions for so long had crumbled, revealing a part of herself she had barely recognized. She had always thought of love as an abstract concept, something distant and foreign, but now it was real, tangible, and breathing in the space between her and Michael. For the next few weeks, they spent nearly every day together, wandering through the forests of Arendor, talking late into the night about the things that mattered most to them. Michael had become her constant companion, and with each conversation, Ilia felt herself falling deeper into something she had never expected: a love that transcended the boundaries of their two very different worlds. But as their connection deepened, so too did the complexities of their relationship. It wasn't long before Ilia began to notice the unspoken tension that lingered between them. Michael, for all his warmth and openness, seemed to carry a weight on his shoulders, a quiet burden that he hadn't yet shared with her. And while he never spoke of it directly, Ilia could sense it in the way he hesitated sometimes, his gaze drifting toward the distant horizon, as if searching for something just out of reach. One evening, as they walked along the edge of a bioluminescent river, the glowing water casting a soft light over their faces, Ilia decided to confront the growing distance between them. The sky above was clear, the twin moons of Arendor hanging low on the horizon, their light shimmering on the surface of the water like stars scattered across a darkened canvas. "Michael," she began, her voice soft but steady, "I've noticed that something's been on your mind lately. I don't want to push, but I want you to know that you can talk to me. About anything." He was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the river as they walked side by side. His fingers brushed against hers, sending a familiar jolt of warmth through her, but his expression remained thoughtful, almost distant. Ilia could see the lines of worry etched into his brow, the quiet conflict that simmered just beneath the surface. Finally he sighed, his shoulders sagging slightly, as if the weight of whatever he was carrying had grown too heavy to bear alone. "It's not that I don't want to talk to you," he said quietly. "It's just, there are things I haven't figured out yet. Things I'm not sure how to explain." Ilia stopped walking, gently pulling him to a halt as well. She turned to face him, her pale blue eyes searching his dark ones for answers. "What things?" Michael hesitated, running a hand through his dark hair, his expression torn. For a moment he looked like he wanted to say something, but then his gaze dropped to the ground, and he shook his head. "Ilia." This, he gestured between the two of them. "What's happening between us, it's incredible. But it's also complicated. You know that, right?" She blinked, her heart skipping a beat. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm human, and you're Arendorian," he said softly, his voice tinged with regret. "We come from two completely different worlds. Different cultures, different biology, even different lifespans." The last word hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that Ilia hadn't yet allowed herself to consider. She had known, intellectually, that humans lived shorter lives than her kind, but she had never thought about it in the context of her relationship with Michael. The realization hit her like a sudden gust of cold wind, leaving her breathless. "How long do humans live?" she asked quietly, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Michael hesitated before answering, his voice low. "On average, about 70 or 80 Earth years. Some longer, some shorter, depending on health and other factors." Elia's heart clenched at the words. By Arendorian standards, that was a blink of an eye. Her people lived for centuries, their lifespans stretching far beyond what most species could comprehend. The idea that Michael's time in this universe might be so short, so fleeting, filled her with a deep ache she hadn't expected. 70 or 80 years, she echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael looked at her, his expression pained. "I know it's not much. I wish I could change that, but I can't. And that's why I've been struggling. I care about you, Ilia, more than I've ever cared about anyone, but I don't want to burden you with something that might not last as long as you deserve." The sincerity in his voice, the raw vulnerability, sent a wave of emotion crashing over her. Ilia had never considered herself particularly emotional, but in that moment she felt the full weight of her feelings for him: love, fear, hope, and an aching sadness for the reality they now faced. She stepped closer, reaching out to take his hand in hers. The warmth of his touch grounded her, anchoring her in the present, and for a moment they stood in silence, the glowing river beside them, the only witness to their shared heartache. "Michael," she said softly, her voice steady despite the storm of emotion swirling inside her. "I don't care about how long we have. I care about this, about being with you now. However long it lasts, it's worth it to me." His eyes flickered with something she couldn't quite place: hope, perhaps, or relief, but there was still a shadow of doubt lingering behind his gaze. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to hurt you, Ilia. I don't want you to regret this." "I won't," she said, her voice firm. "I won't regret a single moment. What we have, it's rare. I don't want to let fear of the future ruin it." Michael let out a slow breath, his shoulders relaxing as if a weight had been lifted. He squeezed her hand, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "You always know just what to say." Ilia smiled back, though there was a bittersweet edge to it. "That's because I'm not afraid to tell you how I feel." He chuckled softly, his thumb brushing gently over the back of her hand. "I should learn from you then." For a while they stood in silence, their hands intertwined as they watched the soft glow of the river's bioluminescent waters ripple beneath the twin moons. There was something comforting in the quiet, in the knowledge that they were facing this uncertainty together. But as the evening wore on, Ilia couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something left unsaid, something deeper, that Michael hadn't yet shared with her. Michael reached for her hand, his fingers brushing hers in a gesture so gentle that it sent a ripple of warmth through her. His touch carried with it an unspoken language, one that needed no words. She responded by gripping his hand tighter, their palms pressed together, as if confirming the bond that had grown between them. The stars above twinkled like distant dreams, but in that moment, the only reality that mattered to Ilia was here, sitting beside Michael. There was no barrier between them, no distance created by their differences. They were simply two souls, connected by something deeper than words or even biology. The quiet between them wasn't empty, it was full of meaning, full of emotions that pulsed just beneath the surface. Ilia turned to look at him, her heart swelling with emotion she could no longer suppress. His eyes met hers, warm and filled with a deep affection that made her feel as though she were the center of his world. His gaze wasn't just affectionate, it was full of admiration, wonder, and something more. She felt her breath catch as she realized what that something more was. "Being with you," Michael said softly, his voice a low, gentle murmur. "It's a miracle. I didn't expect to find this. Not here, not like this." Ilia's chest tightened, her heart racing at his words. There was a quiet intensity in his voice that made her feel as though they had stepped into a new realm of intimacy, one where their emotions were laid bare. "You're a miracle to me too," she whispered back, her voice trembling slightly with the weight of the truth. "I've always wondered what it felt like, the connection humans speak of. Love. Now I feel it with you." Michael's gaze softened even more, and he moved closer to her. The air between them seemed to pulse with energy, a warmth that came not from the bioluminescent glow around them, but from the connection they shared. Slowly he raised a hand and gently placed it against her cheek, the touch tender, intimate. Ilya leaned into his palm, closing her eyes for a moment as she absorbed the sensation. Michael leaned forward, and ever so softly, his lips brushed her forehead. The kiss was light, a simple, gentle gesture, but it carried with it the depth of the emotions they had been building over the weeks they had spent together. It was a kiss not born out of mere desire but out of a love that had transcended the physical differences between them. Ilya felt her entire body warm in response, her heart swelling with a sense of peace and belonging she had never known before. As he pulled back slightly, their eyes met again, and the closeness between them was undeniable. Ilya leaned in, resting her head gently against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. It was a sound she could get lost in, a comforting, grounding presence that made her feel as though they had become one. Michael's arms wrapped around her, holding her close, and they sat in silence for a long moment, simply existing together in the quiet glow of the night. "Do you hear that?" she asked, her voice soft as she listened to the steady beat of his heart. He smiled, resting his chin gently atop her head. "What?" "Our hearts," she whispered, "beating together." He chuckled softly, the sound rumbling through his chest. "I guess they are." The connection between them went beyond touch or even words. It was something that ran deep, something Ilya could feel in the very core of her being. They were connected in a way that transcended physical limitations, a love that existed not just in the mind or body, but in the soul. Ilya understood now what she had been searching for all this time. It wasn't just about human biology or reproduction. It was about the shared moments, the silent understanding, the comfort of knowing that someone was truly with her. Michael pulled her closer, his hand stroking her hair softly as they continued to sit together under the blanket of stars. The night felt endless, as if time had stopped, and in that moment the universe shrank down to just the two of them. As the soft hum of the Arendorian forest filled the air, Ilya felt herself drifting, lulled by the rhythm of Michael's breathing and the warmth of his arms around her. She felt safe, more so than she ever had in her life. Safe and loved. And in that love she found a peace that transcended anything she had ever known. As the hours passed, the two of them eventually moved inside her home, where the bioluminescent glow from the walls painted their figures in soft hues of green and blue. They settled together, the intimacy of the night extending beyond words or gestures. They spoke in whispers, shared quiet laughter, and eventually, as the night deepened, Ilya found herself falling asleep in Michael's arms. She felt his breath against her hair, his presence grounding her as she slipped into the comforting embrace of sleep. And in that moment, as she lay with him, their hearts still beating in sync, Ilya knew one thing with absolute certainty: this was love. It wasn't just the curiosity that had brought them together, it was something far more profound. It was a love that transcended worlds, species, and time itself. And though they had no idea what the future held, one thing was clear: whatever came next, they would face it together. This night between Ilya and Michael is meant to highlight the deep emotional bond they've formed, showing that their love goes beyond the physical, existing in the shared quiet moments, the emotional intimacy, and the connection that brings their two worlds together. The days that followed their night together were filled with a deep sense of contentment, as if the universe itself had shifted to accommodate the love that had blossomed between Ilya and Michael. Each morning, the warmth of the twin sons of Arendor greeted them as they explored the lush forests and glowing rivers, their bond growing stronger with each shared experience. Yet, despite the peace that enveloped them, an unspoken question lingered in the air: what came next? How long could their love endure in a universe that seemed determined to keep them apart? Michael had never felt so grounded in one place before. As a merchant, his life had always been one of movement, drifting from planet to planet, never staying long enough to build lasting ties. But now, with Ilya, he had found something he hadn't realized: he'd been searching for home. Arendor, with its tranquil beauty and gentle rhythms, felt more like home than any place he had ever known. But it wasn't just the planet, it was Ilya. He stood outside her home one evening, watching the sky fade into a deep violet as the twin suns set behind the mountains. Ilya was inside, preparing the evening meal, and the soft glow from the bioluminescent plants illuminated her silhouette through the window. Michael felt a pang of longing as he watched her, but it wasn't the usual longing of desire. It was something deeper, a longing to stay, to build a life with her, to make their love last despite the odds stacked against them. But how could they make it work? He was human, with a short lifespan, and she was Arendorian, destined to live centuries beyond him. No matter how much they loved each other, time was a relentless force, and it would inevitably tear them apart. Michael had been trying to ignore that fact, to live in the present, but the future loomed over them like a shadow, impossible to ignore forever. That night, as they sat together beneath the stars, the weight of the future hung heavy in the air. Ilya could sense it in the way Michael was quieter than usual, his eyes distant, as if he were lost in thoughts too heavy to share. "You've been thinking about it again, haven't you?" she asked softly, turning to face him. Her pale blue eyes reflected the light of the stars, and for a moment Michael wondered if she could see through to his very soul. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I can't help it, Ilya. I'm trying to live in the moment, to just be with you, but I keep thinking about the future." Ilya's heart clenched at his words, but she nodded, understanding. She had been thinking about the future too, though she had tried to push those thoughts aside, to savor the time they had together without letting fear taint it. But now, sitting here under the vast sky, with Michael's hand in hers, she knew they couldn't avoid the conversation any longer. "I've been thinking about it too," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, "about how we can make this work." Michael turned to her, his dark eyes filled with uncertainty. "Have you come up with any answers? Because I haven't." Ilya hesitated, her mind swirling with the thoughts that had been plaguing her for days. She had researched interspecies relationships, trying to find any examples of humans and Arendorians being together, but there were none. The two species had always remained distant, their paths rarely crossing in such intimate ways. There were no precedents, no guides to follow. But that didn't mean it was impossible. "I don't have all the answers," she said softly. "But I do know one thing: I don't want to live without you. Whatever the future holds, whatever challenges we have to face, I want to face them together." Michael's gaze softened, and he reached out to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing gently against her skin. "I feel the same way, Ilya, but I don't want to put you through the pain of watching me grow old while you stay the same. It's not fair to you." Ilya's chest tightened, but she shook her head. "Michael, don't you see? Time doesn't matter to me. It never has. I've lived my whole life watching the stars move slowly across the sky, knowing that they will be here long after I'm gone. But love is different. Love is what makes time bearable, and I would rather have a lifetime with you, no matter how short it might be, than spend eternity without knowing what this feels like." Michael stared at her, his expression a mixture of awe and disbelief. He had always thought of Ilya as this ethereal being, someone beyond his understanding, but in this moment she seemed so real, so human in her desires and fears. "Ilya," he whispered, his voice breaking slightly, "I don't deserve you." She smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You deserve more than you know. We deserve this, and I believe we can make it work. Maybe we won't have all the answers right away, but we can find them together." Michael swallowed hard, his throat tight with emotion. He had always been a wanderer, never staying in one place long enough to form deep connections, but now, sitting here with Ilya, he realized that he didn't want to wander anymore. He wanted to stay. He wanted to build a life with her, no matter how uncertain the future might be. "Then we'll face it together," he said softly, his voice filled with determination. "Whatever comes, we'll find a way." Ilya nodded, her heart swelling with hope. They sat in silence for a long moment, simply holding each other, their breaths in sync with the rhythm of the night. And in that silence, something shifted, an understanding that went beyond words. They might not have all the answers, but they had each other, and that was enough. The decision to stay. The next morning, Michael made a decision. He couldn't leave. Not now, not after everything they had shared. His life as a merchant had been exciting, full of adventure, but he realized that those adventures were meaningless without someone to share them with. Ilya had become his anchor, his reason to stay grounded, and he wasn't willing to let that go. When he told Elia of his decision, her face lit up with a joy so pure that it took his breath away. They spent the day making plans, discussing how they could build a life together on Arendor, what their future might look like, and how they would handle the inevitable challenges that would come their way. They spoke of practical matters, like where Michael could set up his trade on the planet, but also of deeper things, the possibility of children, of building a family, and of the life they could share. There was a sense of excitement in their voices, but also a quiet understanding that this wouldn't be easy. Interspecies relationships came with their own unique set of difficulties, not just physical but emotional as well. That night, as they lay in bed together, Michael turned to Elia, his voice soft in the darkness. "Do you ever wonder what the rest of the galaxy would think of us?" Elia smiled, her head resting on his chest. "I think they'd be envious." He laughed softly, his hand stroking her hair. "Maybe, but I don't care what they think. All that matters is you." She lifted her head to look at him, her eyes glowing softly in the moonlight. "And all that matters to me is you." Facing the universe together. In the weeks that followed, Michael and Elia settled into a new rhythm, building a life together on Arendor. Michael continued his work as a trader, setting up a permanent shop in the marketplace, but his travels became fewer and farther between. He no longer felt the need to wander, knowing that Elia would be waiting for him when he returned. Their love grew stronger with each passing day, and though the future still held uncertainty, they faced it together. There were moments of doubt, of fear about what was to come, but those moments were fleeting. They had found something rare and precious in each other, and they weren't willing to let it go. Elia's people, though initially surprised by their relationship, came to accept it. They saw the love between them, the way they brought out the best in each other, and slowly they began to understand that what Michael and Elia had was special. One evening, as they stood together on the edge of the glowing river, watching the stars twinkle in the sky, Elia turned to Michael and smiled. "We did it," she said softly. "We found a way." Michael smiled back, wrapping his arm around her shoulders and pulling her close. "Yeah, we did." They stood in silence for a long time, simply watching the stars, their hearts filled with a quiet sense of peace. The future might still be uncertain, but one thing was clear: whatever came next, they would face it together. And in that moment, beneath the endless sky, they knew that their love, born from curiosity, nurtured by understanding, and strengthened by the challenges they had faced, was something that transcended time and space. It was a love that would last, not just in their lifetimes, but in the stars themselves. They had created something extraordinary together, something that would endure long after they were gone. And for them, that was enough. This final chapter is intended to reflect the growth of Michael and Elia's relationship, showing how their love, despite the challenges of time and species, becomes something lasting and profound. It focuses on their emotional journey, the depth of their connection, and the hope they find in facing the future together.